1. Chapter 1. The day the wind stopped was the day everything changed. The doctor had just confirmed it, stomach cancer. Stage 3. I had been staring blankly at the pregnancy test for hours before the phone buzzed in my hand. It was Matt, my boyfriend of 8 years. "Leah, I've been thinking about the wedding plans. Can we hold off on getting the marriage certificate?" "Sure," I replied, too exhausted to argue. "I don't want you to think I don't want to marry you," he added quickly. It felt as though he hadn't expected me to agree so easily. There was a brief pause, then Matt mumbled something about working late before hanging up abruptly. Chapter 2. Matt and I had been together for 8 years. We were supposed to get married soon. We had built everything from scratch after graduating college. Our business had finally started picking up last year, and we had just bought a new car and paid the down payment for a new house. We were even talking about having kids. But then came the diagnosis. That evening, when Matt didn't come home for dinner, I made a simple bowl of noodles with vegetables, trying to figure out how to tell him. After all, we had agreed that we would get married by the end of this year. The doctor was a young woman, maybe in her early 30s. She suggested that I should consider not keeping the baby, to focus on the treatment, and mentioned that my chances of survival were higher because I was still young. "Don't be afraid," she had said. "You have a good chance of recovery." I wasn't that afraid, though. Not really. Because I had Matt. He would stay by my side. I believed that. The doorbell rang and I was surprised it was late, and Matt never used the doorbell. When I opened the door, there he was, swaying slightly, clearly drunk. Supporting him was Ginny, a new intern we had just hired, a fresh college graduate. "Sorry, Leah," she said, blushing and adjusting her floral dress. "Matt had a little too much at dinner with the clients. His car's parked downstairs." Matt stumbled to the sofa and immediately fell asleep. I took his suit jacket from Ginny, catching a whiff of the faint citrusy scent of her perfume. "Thank you, Ginny," I smiled politely. "It's late. I'll drive you home." Ginny resisted at first, but eventually relented when I insisted. "I don't feel comfortable letting you take a cab by yourself." "Leah, when are you and Matt getting married?" she asked tentatively during the ride. Caught off guard, I thought back to Matt's earlier phone call and forced a smile. "We're waiting until the company stabilizes, maybe in 2 years. Or maybe until my health stabilizes." "I see." Ginny gazed out the window thoughtfully before giving me a sweet, knowing smile. "Got it." After dropping her off, I parked the car and remembered I had left my vitamins in the glove compartment. Opening the passenger side door, I found something unexpected, a torn, square-shaped package stuck in the seatbelt crevice. Grease from the packet had seeped onto my fingers. I stood there, frozen. Suddenly, I thought of Ginny's dress, her flushed face when she arrived, and Matt's strange behavior on the phone earlier that day. The way he avoided my gaze after drinking too much. I sat numbly in the car, trying to process everything. So much had happened in just one day, and I didn't even know where to begin. Chapter 3. Matt and I had started dating during our freshman year of college. He had pursued me relentlessly. Back then, I was working part-time at a beef noodle soup restaurant near campus to cover my tuition fees. Matt, a rich kid, had fallen for me at first sight. To get close to me, he ate at the shop for a whole year. 1 year of beef noodle soup, until he got sick of it and even threw up in the restaurant on the day I finally agreed to date him. Since then, he can't stand the smell of beef noodle soup. Matt knew I was proud and didn't want to accept his help, so he'd often pretend to join me at the school cafeteria while secretly buying me fruit and milk. "How can my future wife be malnourished?" He'd joke. He also knew I couldn't stand cigarette smoke, so he quit smoking for me. Once, when his nicotine cravings hit during a night out with friends, he sheepishly pulled out a lollipop instead, much to the shock of his buddies. "You don't get it," he had said, embarrassed. "I've got responsibilities now. I've never understood why Matt liked me so much. He's tall, handsome, and comes from a wealthy family." But Matt never cared. He used to say, "I like you just because I like you, okay?" He's always been stubborn, the type of person who follows his chosen path until the very end. I saw this clearly the first time he brought me home to meet his parents on New Year's Eve. I stood awkwardly in front of his parents, clutching a bag of fruit, feeling completely out of place. Matt's parents were polite but distant. After dinner, when the housekeeper was clearing the table, his mother discreetly motioned for Matt to speak to her alone. The lights in their luxurious mansion were so bright, brighter than the August sun, almost blinding. The light reflected off my worn-out winter coat and faded jeans, the best clothes I owned. I sat stiffly on their European-style sofa, trying to make myself as invisible as possible. The glances from the housekeepers were subtle but mocking, stinging my pride like tiny daggers. Then I overheard his mother's shrill voice. "She must know you're rich, right? And she has no parents? What can she offer you in the future?" It felt like someone had stomped on my heart, leaving me gasping for air. My head dropped lower and I dug my nails into my arm to keep from crying. And then I heard the door slam. Matt stormed back into the room, his face dark with anger. He grabbed my hand, pulling me to my feet. "We're leaving. If you walk out that door, don't bother calling me your mother anymore," his mother shouted after us. "We won't give you a single cent." Matt hesitated at the door for just a moment, long enough for his mother's voice to turn triumphant. But then he turned back, grabbed the fruit I had brought, and said, "You don't deserve it." The streets were deserted that New Year's Eve. No cars, no people, not even the subway was running. We ended up walking all the way to a hotel. As we crossed a pedestrian bridge, the wind howled through my hair, carrying with it the distant glow of the city's lights. But none of those lights belonged to me. Without turning to face him, I whispered, "Matt, let's break up." He didn't say a word. "Matt, He unzipped his coat and pulled me into a tight embrace from behind. He held me like that for what felt like hours, as if he was afraid I would disappear if he let go. Then, in a soft but firm voice, he said, "Leah, I'll give you a home." 3. When I got back that night, Matt was still asleep on the couch. I gently draped a blanket over him. My phone lit up with 2 unread messages. Both were from Sarah. She dropped me off safe and sound. "Don't worry, boss." Attached was a cute little girl emoji, blowing a kiss and saying goodnight. I knew I shouldn't doubt Matt, but I couldn't help scrolling up to read their previous messages. "What's for lunch today, boss? Did she make you another bento?" "Yeah." "Ugh, boss, why don't you ever join us single folks for tea takeout?" "Maybe tomorrow." The date on the message was 2 days ago. I remembered Matt telling me not to get up early the next morning to make his lunch. When I asked why, he hugged me from behind, kissed my neck, and said he didn't want me to overwork myself, giving me the day off. "Boss, when are you guys getting married?" Attached was another teary-eyed emoji. Messages he usually replied to instantly were suddenly left unanswered for 10 minutes. His eventual response, "I don't know." He didn't know. I put down the phone, no longer feeling the need to scroll further. There was no point. There weren't any explicit messages. But seeing the way Matt responded to Sarah, how quickly he replied to her, referring to me as she, made me feel like I was the third wheel in their relationship. I placed my phone down and headed to the study. I tucked the medical records and the pregnancy test into the bottom drawer, along with our savings account book. The wind picked up outside. A light rain had started falling, bringing with it a warm, damp breeze. I closed the door and sat down at my desk, lost in thought. When I first got the diagnosis, I was terrified, no matter how much I tried to deny it. I had sat at the entrance of the hospital, watching the bustling street and trying to figure out how to tell Matt without making him too sad. Should I tell him with a smile? Maybe I could joke about it, "Matt, I have good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first?" If he picked the good news, I'd tell him he was going to be a father. If he chose the bad news, I'd laugh and say I was kidding. He'd probably knock me on the head, and then I'd tell him the truth about the cancer. Then he would hug me from behind, just like before, and tell me not to be afraid. I'd comfort him, teasing him for being too worried, and tell him I wasn't afraid at all. Or maybe I should just cry and tell him the truth. Tell him how scared I am, scared of the pain, scared that the treatment wouldn't work. Tell him that if chemotherapy made me lose all my hair, I wouldn't be able to wear my hair in a ponytail anymore, and dresses wouldn't look good on me. Tell him how much I want to keep the baby. We had already planned for a room in the new house with a wall of Lego bricks for our child. He had even said that we'd have a little girl, and he would build Lego sets with her and buy her all the pretty dresses she wanted. And he would say the most cliché thing, how I'd always be the most beautiful woman in the world to him, and that we would have many more children. If this one didn't understand, we wouldn't need him. But I hadn't even figured out what to say when his call came through. He told me we should delay getting the marriage license. Without hesitation, I agreed. He loved me so much, had sacrificed so much for me. How could I let him waste his life with me? At that moment, I almost wished he didn't love me anymore. Then he wouldn't be sad. Maybe a god had passed by that day and heard my wish, because he really didn't love me as much as he used to. I still wanted to live, but I wasn't sure if living was more painful than chemotherapy. 4. I spent the night in the study with the windows open, but I still couldn't figure out what to do. Matt woke up around 7, rubbed his temples, and pushed open the door to the study. He was dressed in his usual suit pants and light blue shirt, which made his broad shoulders and narrow waist stand out. I wasn't usually one to obsess over looks, but even after all these years, his appearance still stunned me sometimes. Seeing me sitting there, he looked surprised and asked what was wrong. I shook my head. Nothing, I'm thinking of taking some time off work. Matt smiled and reached out to ruffle my hair. Quit if you want. I can afford to take care of you. I gently dodged his hand. Matt's hand froze in midair for a moment before awkwardly pulling back. Why do you want time off? I'm just tired lately. If you counted my working life, I'd been working for 9 years. It made sense to be tired. Since college, I had worked part-time to support myself. When we first graduated, I was the one supporting Matt. At the time, Matt had cut ties with his family and was starting a business with his best friend. We were still renting a small apartment, barely making ends meet. To save $500 in rent, I commuted an extra hour by subway. To get to work at 8, I had to get up at 5:45. After working overtime until 9, I wouldn't get home until after 11, and I'd fall asleep the second my head hit the pillow. We had no time and no money back then. In the worst of it, there was a whole week when Matt and I barely said a word to each other. But no matter how late it was, he always came home. One time, he forgot his keys. I woke up in the middle of the night and realized he wasn't next to me. When I checked my phone, I saw a message and opened the door to find him asleep outside. He hadn't wanted to knock and wake me, so he'd decided to sleep outside instead. The hardest winter was that first year when the company delayed paying my salary for 2 months, and we had no money left by the end of the year. That day, Matt came to pick me up from the subway station. As we walked over the bridge, we passed a new hot pot restaurant that had just opened. Their signature dish was butter hot pot, and there was a long line of people waiting to get in. The fragrant steam wafted through the air, filling our senses. Matt said that once we had money, the first meal we'd eat would be at that hot pot place. We'll order the mild butter and tomato hot pot and 10 plates of lamb rolls. Why 10 plates? 5 to look at and 5 to cook, he said. Gross. I'm not sharing hot pot with someone who orders half and half. Are you really starting a war between butter and tomato hot pot? I don't even talk to people who eat sweet rice dumplings. Before he could finish, he choked on his saliva and started coughing violently. I panicked and rushed to pat his back. We looked at each other and suddenly we both burst out laughing. We laughed so hard we couldn't stand up straight, even as passers-by stared at us. Looking back, I still don't know what was so funny. Maybe it was just how absurdly happy we were, despite being broke. Eventually we made some money, but that hot pot restaurant closed down before we ever got the chance to try it. Once you start reminiscing, it's hard to stop. Thinking about the past, I suddenly felt my eyes well up with tears. Why are you crying? Matt panicked, quickly wiping away my tears. Don't cry. It's nothing. I just don't want to work anymore. I'm too tired. I leaned against him. Take it easy. If the boss doesn't approve your time off, we'll just quit. How about that? Matt squatted down and looked at me seriously, his eyes overflowing with tenderness. 8 years had passed, and the once reckless and impulsive rich kid had matured into a real man. I knew I shouldn't, but looking at his face, I couldn't help but feel reluctant to let go. After a moment of hesitation, I reached out and tugged at his shirt. Matt, could you stay with me today? I thought to myself that if he stayed, I'd finally tell him everything. Whether we broke up or stayed together, we'd have to settle things. After all, we had been together for 8 years. We needed an answer. I have an important meeting today, but I'll be home early. You can catch up on sleep, watch some TV, or read a book. I'll be back before you know it, okay? I let go of his shirt. Matt tucked me into bed and kissed my forehead like he always did. Be good, get some rest. I'll do the dishes for the whole month, okay? And next month for your birthday I'll buy you whatever you want, alright? I nodded, and only then did Matt leave the room, closing the door softly behind him. Once again, I was left alone. 5. I agree. I signed the document and handed the organ donation registration form to the doctor. Her name was Dr. Ann. She was fair-skinned and probably not much older than me. With a concerned look, she asked, "Have you gotten your family's consent? If they disagree later, they can revoke it." I don't have family. I smiled. Donate whatever you can. At least if I donated my organs, someone would visit my grave regularly. I glanced at her and caught the fleeting look of pity on her face. You don't have to feel bad, it's fine. Actually, your condition isn't that bad. Stay positive. Your mood can really affect your prognosis. Dr. Ann seemed more anxious than I was. Chemotherapy and targeted therapy can affect the baby, so I wouldn't recommend. I know, I had already looked it up. If it were an early stage, I might still have a chance. Maybe mother and child could both survive. But for advanced cancer, doctors generally advised against keeping the baby. If I had family by my side, the doctor might try to play along with them, saying my condition wasn't that serious. Yesterday, I read on a forum that some people were cured after their families lied to them, boosting their spirits. Miracles do happen when people are in a good mood. But no one was lying to me. I couldn't leave the baby alone in this world, as lonely as I had been. At 7 weeks, how big would the baby be? I asked with a small smile. I don't really feel anything yet. There's already a heartbeat. Really? Does it actually beat? It does. Dr. Ann smiled, clearly fond of children. That's wonderful. I calculated. If everything went well, I would give birth in May of next year. If everything went well. Seeing my expression, she hesitated before writing down her phone number on a piece of paper. This is my number. My WeChat is the same. If you need anything, contact me directly. Thank you, Dr. Ann. The bus ride home was crowded. I sat down and sent a message to Dr. Ann. Dr. Ann, I read online that pregnancy and late-stage cancer both cause nausea and make it hard to eat. I can't really tell the difference. As I waited for her reply, someone nudged me. Young lady, this seat is for the elderly, disabled, and pregnant. Get up and give the old man your seat, said a woman beside me. An elderly man with graying hair stood in front of me, and the woman gave me a disapproving look. You're young and strong. How can you sit there when an old man is standing? Her voice was loud, catching the attention of others nearby. I looked around. The bus was packed, and no one else was getting up to offer their seat. Feeling awkward, I stood up immediately. But as soon as I rose, I felt a sharp pain in my abdomen, as if the child inside me had started protesting. I steadied myself, leaning against the pole for support. The bus rattled as it drove, and I stumbled slightly. The old man smiled at me kindly. Thank you, young lady. A few people around me gave me approving looks. It was strange. It wasn't like I needed their approval, but in that moment, I felt my throat tighten. My phone buzzed. Dr. Ann had replied, Don't worry, stay positive, eat small frequent meals and keep your mood up. I'm here for you if you need anything. I quickly replied with a thumbs up emoji and added, I'll definitely make it. For some reason, I felt a little happier. 6. I didn't tell Matt anything that day, or the next day. After that, I stopped feeling the need to tell him altogether. Since his parents had severed ties with him, Matt had only one thing on his mind, becoming rich. He had turned all his ambition and pride into a sense of mission for his business. The number of times he came home late increased. Sometimes, when I thought I heard the sound of keys turning in the door late at night, it was just a dream. One day, I received a message from Sarah asking me to come to the company for a financial report. I went to the office to review the financial report. It was something I used to be so passionate about, building the company from the ground up with Matt. But now, as I sat in the boardroom flipping through pages of spreadsheets, everything felt distant, like a memory from someone else's life. Hey Sarah, I said, glancing up from the report. How are things with the new hire, Erin? Sarah's expression tightened. She shifted in her seat and looked down at her hands. Erin's been fine. She's good at her job. Just some things feel a little off, you know? I nodded. Erin was the bright new graduate who had been working closely with Matt on some of the bigger accounts. The same Erin who had helped him upstairs that night when he was drunk. Yeah, I get it, I murmured. But sometimes that's just how it is when someone's new. People take time to settle in. Sarah sighed. I hope so, but... She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward me. Have you noticed anything going on with her and Matt? My heart skipped a beat, but I forced a smile. No, not really. What do you mean? Sarah bit her lip. I don't want to overstep, but the way they talk, the way she looks at him, I just think you should be aware. That's all. I stared at the papers in front of me, my mind racing. I'd already suspected something was off, but hearing it from someone else, hearing that other people were starting to notice, made it feel more real. Too real. Thanks, Sarah, I said quietly, closing the report. I'll keep that in mind. On the way home, I stopped by the pharmacy to pick up my prescription. The clerk handed me the bag with a sympathetic look, as if she could see straight through to my soul. I held the bag tightly, thinking about everything I hadn't told Matt yet, the cancer, the baby, my fears, my hopes. As I drove, I passed by the hot pot restaurant that had opened near our old apartment, the one we used to joke about trying once we had money. I almost laughed out loud, thinking of how ridiculous it seemed now. We had money, we had everything we thought we wanted, but at what cost? That night, Matt didn't come home until late. I was sitting on the couch when he walked in, his tie loosened, his eyes tired. He looked surprised to see me awake. Why are you still up? He asked, dropping his keys on the counter. I couldn't sleep, I said, my voice quiet. He sighed and sat down beside me, rubbing his temples. It's been a long day. Is Erin working late with you again? I asked, my voice steady but my heart pounding in my chest. Matt glanced at me, his brow furrowing. Yeah, why? No reason, I said, forcing a smile. I was just curious. He looked at me for a moment, as if trying to gauge my mood, but then he sighed again and leaned back on the couch. You know, we're really close to landing that big account. If we pull this off, the company's future is set. That's great, I murmured, my eyes fixed on the floor. We sat in silence for a while. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid between us, like a physical presence in the room. I wanted to tell him, I needed to tell him, but every time I opened my mouth, the words caught in my throat. Instead, I asked, "Do you still love me, Matt?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for too long. Matt turned to me, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. Of course I do. Why would you even ask that? I shrugged, trying to hide the ache in my chest. I don't know, sometimes I wonder if things are different now. If we're different. He frowned and reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. We've been through a lot, but that doesn't change how I feel about you. But it did. We both knew it, even if neither of us wanted to say it out loud. I nodded and squeezed his hand back, letting the silence fall between us once again. 7. The days blurred together after that. Matt was working late more often, and I was spending more and more time alone in the house. The baby, a secret I still hadn't shared, was a constant reminder of the future I was unsure of. I started packing some things. Not because I was planning to leave, but because I needed to feel like I was doing something. I needed to feel in control of something, even if it was just organizing my life into neat little boxes. One afternoon while Matt was at work, I received a message from Sarah. Sarah, Aaron's been acting strange around Matt lately. I thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. I already knew this, of course, but seeing it spelled out made it harder to ignore. I replied with a simple, thanks. That evening when Matt finally came home, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to tell him everything about the baby, about the cancer, about how scared I was. Matt, I began, as he loosened his tie and collapsed onto the couch. I need to talk to you. He looked up, his expression tired but patient. What's wrong? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words pressing down on me. I found out a few weeks ago that I have cancer. Stomach cancer. Matt's eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at me, speechless. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to worry you. I thought maybe I could handle it on my own. But now it's too much. I could see the shock and confusion on his face, the way his mind raced to catch up with the news. And I'm pregnant, I added, my voice barely above a whisper. Matt's reaction was slow, almost like he couldn't process both things at once. You're pregnant? And you have cancer? I nodded, tears filling my eyes. I don't know what to do, Matt. I'm scared. I don't want to lose the baby, but the doctors. They don't think I should keep IIT. Matt sat there staring at me, his face pale. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't want to burden you. You've been so busy with work, with a company. I didn't want to distract you. He stood up, running a hand through his hair, pacing the room. Leah, this is serious. You should have told me. I could have helped. I know, I whispered, my tears falling freely now. I know. Matt stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression softening. He walked over and pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. We'll figure this out, he murmured into my hair. We'll figure it out together. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that might be true. Matt held me close, his arms around me as if trying to shield me from the world, but I could feel the tension in his body. As comforting as it felt to be held by him, I knew things between us were far from resolved. The unspoken questions hung in the air, about the baby, about our future, and most of all, about Aaron. He pulled back slightly and looked into my eyes. We need to go to the doctor together. You shouldn't be facing this alone. I nodded, knowing he was right, but even as I agreed, I could feel a distance growing between us. Matt was being supportive now, but deep down, I wondered if the weight of my illness and the baby would be too much for him to bear. Over the next few days, Matt seemed to be making more of an effort to be present. He started coming home earlier, asking me about doctor appointments and how I was feeling, but something still felt off, like we were both tiptoeing around the truth, afraid to confront what was really happening. One evening, I walked into the living room and found Matt on the phone with Aaron. His voice was low, and though he tried to hide it, I could hear the familiarity in his tone. When he hung up, he looked up at me with guilt in his eyes. That was Aaron, he explained quickly. Just work stuff. I nodded, forcing a smile. Of course, work is important, but I couldn't ignore the feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something about their relationship didn't sit right with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just work stuff. That night, as I lay in bed next to Matt, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had cancer, I was pregnant, and the man I'd spent the last 8 years building a life with was slipping away from me. The next morning, I woke up early and made breakfast for Matt, hoping that maybe some normalcy would bring us closer together. When he came into the kitchen, he looked surprised to see me cooking. You didn't have to do this, he said, sitting down at the table. I wanted to, I replied, handing him a plate. We ate in silence for a few minutes before Matt finally spoke. Leah, I've been thinking, maybe we should take some time off from work. Focus on your health, and us. I looked at him, my heart aching. Do you mean, take time off together? Matt hesitated, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. I mean, I need to stay involved with the company, especially with everything going on. But maybe you could take some time for yourself. The word stung, even though I knew he didn't mean to hurt me. So you want me to take time off while you keep working with Erin? Matt flinched at the mention of her name. This isn't about Erin. Isn't it? He asked, my voice trembling. Because it feels like she's becoming more important to you than I am. Matt shook his head. That's not true. I care about you, Leah. You're my wife. But do you still love MME? The question came out before I could stop it. Matt stared at me, his expression pained. Of course I do. But things have been hard. We've both been so focused on work and I guess we lost each other somewhere along the way. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I don't want to lose you, Matt, but I need to know where we stand. Matt reached across the table and took my hand. We'll figure it out, Leah, I promise. But deep down, I wasn't sure if we could. The cracks in our relationship were widening, and I didn't know if we had the strength to repair them. 8. As the weeks went on, I threw myself into the pregnancy and my treatments. Matt was supportive in his own way, but he was still distant, caught up in the company and spending long hours at the office with Erin. One day, after a particularly grueling chemotherapy session, I came home to find Matt sitting on the couch, his face pale. Leah, we need to talk, he said, his voice serious. I sat down across from him, my heart pounding. What is it? I think we need some time apart, he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. I've been doing a lot of thinking and I'm not sure if this is working anymore. The room spun and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What do you mean? You want to separate? Matt nodded, his hands clenched into fists. I think it's for the best. You need to focus on your health and I need to figure some things out. Tears filled my eyes as I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Are you leaving me for Erin? Matt's face twisted in pain. No, this isn't about her, it's about us. Then why are you doing this now? I asked, my voice breaking. Why, when I need you the most? Matt stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Because I don't know if I'm the person you need anymore. I sat there numb, as the reality of what was happening sank in. Matt was leaving me, leaving us, at the worst possible moment. And there was nothing I could do to stop him. 9. After Matt moved out, the house felt unbearably empty. I spent most of my time at the hospital or curled up on the couch trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Dr. Ann continued to check in on me, her kind words a lifeline during the darkest days. But even her reassurance couldn't fill the void that Matt's absence had left. One evening, as I was packing up some of Matt's things, I came across a photo of us from the early days of our relationship. We were smiling, carefree, with our whole future ahead of us. Tears filled my eyes as I stared at the picture. I wanted to go back to that time, to a time when things were simpler, when love was enough to get us through anything. But life wasn't that simple anymore. As I sat on the floor clutching that photo, the weight of everything hit me all at once. My illness, the baby, Matt leaving. It all felt like too much to bear. The chemo had weakened me physically, but the emotional toll was far worse. I curled up on the couch, pulling a blanket over myself as if it could shield me from the pain. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and for a brief moment, I hoped it was Matt. Maybe he had second thoughts. Maybe he realized he couldn't walk away from us. But when I reached for the phone, it wasn't Matt. It was Dr. Ann Leah, just checking in. How are you feeling today? Do you need anything? I stared at the message, the lump in my throat making it hard to breathe. I typed back a short reply. Thanks, Dr. Ann. I'm okay, just tired. She responded almost immediately. I'm here if you ever want to talk. You don't have to go through this alone. I held the phone in my hand, staring at her words. Dr. Ann had been a constant source of support, but there was only so much she could do. The person I really needed, the person I'd built my life with, wasn't here anymore. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry. The sobs came in waves, racking my body until I was completely spent. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, lost in my grief, but eventually the tears slowed. As I wiped my eyes, I looked at the clock. It was late, but I didn't feel like sleeping. I needed to get out of the house, away from the memories that haunted every corner. Grabbing my coat, I decided to take a walk, hoping the cool air would clear my mind. 10. The streets were quiet, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. I walked aimlessly, not really paying attention to where I was going. I passed by a cafe that Matt and I used to visit on weekends. It was closed now, but the sight of it brought back memories of happier times, times when we were inseparable, before the company, before Erin, before everything fell apart. I kept walking, my thoughts swirling. I wondered how long Matt had been thinking about leaving. Had he made up his mind before I got sick? Or had my diagnosis pushed him away? I didn't know if I would ever get the answers to those questions, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. I reached a park and sat down on a bench, pulling my coat tighter around me. The air was crisp, and the wind rustled the leaves in the trees. For a moment I closed my eyes and let the sounds of the night wash over me. Leah? I opened my eyes and saw Dr. Ann standing in front of me, her face filled with concern. I was so startled to see her that I didn't know what to say. I was just heading home from the hospital and saw you sitting here, she said, sitting down beside me. Are you okay? I nodded, even though I wasn't sure how to answer that question anymore. I just needed some air. Dr. Ann looked at me closely, her expression gentle but serious. It's important to take care of yourself, Leah, physically and emotionally. I'm trying, I whispered, my voice barely audible, but everything is falling apart. She didn't say anything right away, giving me the space to open up. Matt left, I finally admitted, my voice breaking. He said he needed time to figure things out, but I think it's over. Dr. Ann let out a small sigh, nodding as if she had suspected something like this. I'm so sorry, Leah. That must be incredibly hard. I nodded, feeling the tears welling up again. I don't know what to do. I'm pregnant, I have cancer, and now I'm alone. You're not alone, she said softly. You have people who care about you, people who want to help, and I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you are stronger than you think. I looked down at my hands, unsure if I believed her. It's just, I don't know how to keep going. It's like everything I've been working for is slipping away. Dr. Ann placed a hand on mine, her touch warm and reassuring. One day at a time, Leah. That's all you need to focus on. Don't think too far ahead, just take care of yourself and your baby. The rest will fall into place when it's time. Her words offered some comfort, though the weight of the situation still pressed down on me. But what if I can't do it? What if? I'm not strong enough. You are, she said firmly. You've come this far, haven't you? You've faced so much already and you're still here. That tells me you're stronger than you realize. We sat in silence for a while, the night air wrapping around us like a blanket. Slowly I felt some of the tension in my chest start to ease. Maybe Dr. Ann was right. Maybe I could get through this, even if it didn't feel like it right now. Eventually I stood up, feeling a little steadier on my feet. Thank you, Dr. Ann, for everything. She smiled and stood up with me. Anytime, Leah. Don't hesitate to call me if you need anything, okay? I nodded, feeling grateful for her kindness. As we walked out of the park together, I realized that for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel quite so alone. 11. The next few weeks passed in a blur of doctor appointments, chemo treatments, and long sleepless nights. Matt and I had little contact, except for a few brief texts about the baby and finances. I knew he wasn't coming back, but I hadn't fully processed what that meant for my future yet. One morning, I woke up feeling particularly weak. The chemo had taken its toll, and even getting out of bed felt like a monumental effort. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on my growing belly, and tried to steady my breathing. I felt a flutter, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement from within. My heart skipped a beat. The baby. For a moment, all of my worries and fears faded away, replaced by the pure joy of feeling my child move for the first time. It was a reminder that, despite everything, there was still life inside of me. Something precious and fragile, depending on me to survive. I placed my hand on my belly and closed my eyes, letting that moment of connection wash over me. We're going to be okay, I whispered. No matter what happens, we're going to be okay. In that moment, I made a promise to myself and to my baby. No matter how hard things got, I would fight. I would keep going. Because this little life growing inside of me deserved a chance. And so did I. The end of this chapter signifies a turning point in Leah's journey. Would you like me to continue from here, or is this a good place to wrap it up? The weeks continued to pass, and with each one, the baby grew stronger, and so did I. It wasn't easy, every day was a challenge. But somehow, I found the strength to keep going. There were days when the nausea and fatigue from the chemo left me unable to get out of bed, and days when I felt overwhelmed by the loneliness of facing everything without Matt. But every time I felt the baby kick or move, it reminded me of the promise I had made. I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore, I was fighting for both of us. Dr. Ann remained a constant presence in my life. She checked in regularly, not just as my doctor but as a friend. She knew how hard it was for me to navigate everything, especially with Matt gone, and her support made all the difference. One afternoon, after another round of chemo, I found myself sitting in the hospital waiting room, too exhausted to drive home. Dr. Ann spotted me and came over, her face full of concern. Leah, you look pale. Let's get you something to eat. I waved her off, trying to muster a smile. I'm okay. Just a little worn out. Come on, I insist. You need to keep your strength up. There's a cafe around the corner that makes a great smoothie, perfect for nausea days. I relented, too tired to argue, and let her lead me to the small cafe. We ordered 2 smoothies, and for the first time in days I managed to sip one without feeling sick. Dr. Ann watched me carefully, as if assessing my emotional state. How are you holding up, really? I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with my worries. But she had become someone I trusted, someone who understood what I was going through. Some days are better than others, I admitted. I'm trying, but it's hard. I don't know if I'm doing this right, if I can even handle all of this. Dr. Ann reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. You're doing more than just handling it, Leah. You're surviving. And that's all anyone can ask of you right now. I felt tears prick the back of my eyes but quickly blinked them away. It's just, everything with Matt. It's like I'm grieving, but he's still out there. It feels so strange. It's a complicated grief, she said softly. You're mourning the loss of the relationship, the life you thought you'd have. It's completely normal to feel that way. I nodded, grateful for her understanding. I thought we'd be doing this together. I never imagined I'd be raising this baby alone. You're not alone, she reminded me gently. You have people who care about you. You have me, your friends, your medical team, and you have your own strength. Don't underestimate that. Her words resonated with me. I had been so focused on what I had lost that I hadn't fully acknowledged what I still had. There were people who wanted to help me, and I had to let them. I couldn't do this all on my own. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For everything. Dr. Ann smiled warmly. You don't have to thank me, Leah. We're in this together. 13. As the months passed, the baby continued to grow, and so did my determination to face whatever came next. My treatments were tough, but I fought through them, always thinking of the life I was carrying inside me. The baby was my hope, my reason to keep moving forward. I had accepted that Matt wasn't coming back. He texted occasionally asking how the baby was doing, but the conversations were short, and he never followed through with any of his promises to visit. It hurt, but I had stopped expecting anything from him. One cold winter evening, I was sitting on the couch, flipping through a baby name book that Dr. Ann had given me as a gift. I hadn't chosen a name yet, but I was starting to feel the pressure. The due date was approaching faster than I had anticipated. As I skimmed through the pages, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting another impersonal text from Matt, but this time it wasn't him. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hi, Leah, this is Aaron. I know this is probably unexpected, but I wanted to reach out. I stared at the message, my heart racing. Aaron? Why was she texting me? The last person I expected to hear from was the woman who had caused so much turmoil in my life. If you're open to it, I'd really like to talk. There are some things I think you should know. For a long moment, I didn't respond. My initial reaction was to ignore the message entirely. After everything that had happened, Aaron was the last person I wanted to hear from. But something inside me, curiosity maybe, made me type back a simple reply. What is it that you want to talk about? Her response came almost immediately. Can we meet in person? I understand if you don't want to, but I think it's important. I hesitated. Meeting Aaron face to face felt like stepping into a storm I wasn't sure I was ready for. But at the same time, I couldn't deny that part of me wanted answers that only she could give. I finally agreed. We can meet tomorrow. There's a cafe near the hospital. Let's meet there. 14. The next day I arrived at the cafe early, my nerves on edge. I didn't know what to expect from this meeting. Would Erin apologize? Would she explain what had really happened between her and Matt? Or would this just be another painful reminder of how everything in my life had fallen apart? Erin walked in a few minutes later, looking nervous herself. She spotted me and gave a tentative smile before walking over to my table. Leah, she said quietly, sitting down across from me. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this is complicated. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Why did you want to talk? She took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. I owe you an apology. I know that what happened between Matt and me, it wasn't right. I never wanted to come between you two, and I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. I folded my arms, feeling a wave of anger rise up inside me. Then why did you? Erin looked down at her hands, clearly uncomfortable. Matt and I, things just spiraled. He was frustrated with the business, with the stress of everything. We got close, and it happened. But it wasn't supposed to. I never wanted to hurt you. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. Well, you did hurt me. Both of you did. I know, she said softly. And I'm sorry, I really am. For a moment neither of us spoke. The weight of everything hung heavy in the air between us. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice quieter. Why now, after all this time? Erin looked at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't expected, genuine regret. Because I wanted you to know that it wasn't about you. It was never about you, Matt. He was lost. He's still lost. And I think you deserve better. Her words hit me harder than I had expected. For so long I had been blaming myself, wondering what I had done wrong, why Matt had left. But hearing her say that he was lost, that it wasn't about me, it brought a strange sense of closure. I don't know if that makes it any better, I said after a long pause. But I appreciate you telling me. Erin nodded, her expression solemn. I understand. I just wanted to clear the air, to make sure you knew the truth. We sat in silence for a few moments, both of us processing the weight of everything that had been said. I didn't know if I could forgive her, or Matt, but at least now I had some answers. Eventually, Erin stood up. I'll let you go, but thank you, Leah. I hope things get better for you. She turned and left the cafe, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an ending nonetheless. I picked up my phone and sent a quick text to Dr. Ann. Maybe I'll name the baby Hope. Her response came almost immediately. I think that's a beautiful name.